My name is Sophia Riley. I'm 32 years old, and I was standing in the bridal suite of the Grand Summit Hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, hairpinned, veil set, and my grandmother's diamond earrings catching the morning light when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Just 6 words. Don't expect anyone to show. At first, I didn't feel anything. My brain couldn't process it. Like maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she meant to send it to someone else. My thumb hovered over the screen as if a second message would follow. An apology, a joke, anything. But it didn't come. Then I opened Instagram. The top post was a photo of my entire family, gathered on a private beach in Maui, holding cocktails under string lights, all wearing white linen, and smiles that looked almost rehearsed. The caption read, "Riley, Legacy, finally together." It hit me like a punch to the chest. I sat down hard on the edge of the vanity chair. My wedding planner, bless her, was fussing over the boutonnieres in the hallway, humming. I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my pulse in my ears. My hands started to tremble. I couldn't breathe. If you've ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, if you've ever spent your life trying to earn the approval of those who only ever saw you as a disappointment, then you already know what that moment feels like. If not, let me take you there. Because this isn't just the story of how my family skipped my wedding to vacation together without telling me. This is the story of how I turned their silence into the loudest reckoning they never saw coming. And if you're watching this, I want you to comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Hit the like button if you've ever chosen yourself over your blood. And subscribe, because trust me, this rabbit hole goes deep. My heart was racing, but not in the way it's supposed to on your wedding day. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The satin bodice fit like a second skin. The cathedral-length veil floated behind me like a promise I had waited years to claim. But my face, it was stone. This was supposed to be the day I was finally seen, finally celebrated. And now, they weren't just absent. They were somewhere tropical, sipping Prosecco and posting it on social media like a press release. No calls, no warnings, no explanations. They knew the date. They'd RSVP'd. My father had even mailed back the response card with a single check mark next to "will attend" a box I now realized had always been a lie. I stood up slowly, my stomach churning, my throat tight. The veil itched like guilt. Outside, the sounds of string instruments tuning up drifted through the open window. Somewhere downstairs, Eric, my fiancé, was probably straightening his tie, waiting for the music cue, not knowing what had just exploded upstairs. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear and never come back. Instead, I took a breath, then another, and another. Because what else do you do when the people who raised you just proved once again that you were never really part of the family? You survive. That's what you do. And I've spent my whole life learning how. I was born into the Riley family owners of one of the most successful boutique hotel chains on the East Coast. My grandfather started with a single colonial-style inn in downtown Newport. My father, Charles Riley, expanded it into a coastal empire. Think wood-paneled lobbies, monogrammed robes, and wait lists for Christmas brunch that stretched back years. To the outside world, we were American royalty, legacy, class, money, the kind of family that graced gala invites and had their own golf cart fleet at the country club. But inside the family, it was a monarchy, and I was never the heir. That role belonged to Trevor, my older brother by 5 years. The golden boy, the varsity captain, the one who couldn't pass Finance 101 but somehow became vice president of operations the day he graduated. Trevor was the Riley name made flesh. Me, I was the one who tried too hard, the one who overcomplicated things, the one who'd fan when I brought home straight A's from St. Mary's Academy. Got a nod and a question, but why not AP Calculus? Meanwhile, Trevor got a new SUV for passing Intro to Macroeconomics with a C+. The worst part, I believed I could change it. For years. I worked harder, graduated magna cum laude from Wharton, got my MBA in hospitality management, started as a junior analyst in our own company, hoping one day I'd earn a spot at the big table, not because I was a Riley, but because I was damn good at what I did. But it never mattered. No matter how many projects I saved, no matter how many spreadsheets I rewrote at 2 a.m. to fix Trevor's incompetence, the only person who saw my value was Eric. And now, the only one who showed up for me, too. I heard a soft knock on the door. It opened slowly, revealing Jenna, my maid of honor, best friend since undergrad, and the one who always knew when to appear right before I lost my mind. "You okay?" she asked gently, stepping inside. Everyone's in position, just waiting on the cue. I turned to her. My voice cracked. "They're not coming." Her eyes widened. "Who?" I held up my phone, showed her the text, then the Instagram post. She stared at the screen for a long beat, then lowered it slowly. "Oh my God. I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. Jenna stepped closer. "Soph, look at me. This wedding isn't about them. It's about you and Eric, about everything you've survived to get here. But the whole front row," I choked, "it's empty. It's going to be empty. Then we'll fill it with people who actually matter," she said fiercely. "I'll pull chairs. We'll move guests up. Hell, I'll put my dog in a bow tie and have him sit there. But you're not letting them steal this from you." I tried to smile, but it came out twisted. That's when she did something unexpected. She reached for the veil and gently took it off. "You don't need their name on your head today," she said. "You've already built your own legacy." I stared at my reflection again. No veil, just me. And for the first time that day, I saw her. Downstairs, the string quartet began to play. I stepped toward the door, one foot in front of the other. No family on my arm. No father to walk me down the aisle. Just me, and the ghost of every time I'd been made to feel less than. I reached the landing and stopped. The ballroom came into view. Guests turned, smiled, stood. And then I saw Eric. His eyes found mine instantly. No pity, no confusion, just love. Pure, unwavering, steady. But as I stepped forward, I caught sight of something in the front row. An empty row of 6 perfectly arranged white chairs. Untouched, unused, reserved with calligraphy tags. Charles Riley, Diana Riley, Trevor Riley, Aunt Laura, Uncle Robert, Jessica Riley. Still blank. Still waiting. Still mocking. And that's when I knew I wouldn't let this be the end of the story. They wanted silence. I'd give them a symphony. Some people are born into families that feel like warm quilts stitched together with love, safety, and stories passed down at Thanksgiving dinners. I was born into a brand. Not a family. A legacy. A perfectly polished image curated by generations of Rileys who believed success was measured in magazine covers, charity galas, and square footage. Our family motto, though never spoken aloud, was simple. Appearances are everything. And to be fair, we looked flawless from the outside. Our estate in Newport overlooked the Atlantic. The hedges were shaped weekly, not monthly. My mother hosted annual fundraisers for children's hospitals she'd never visited. My father's office had original oil portraits not of us, but of himself, in various poses of ambition. The Riley Hospitality Group was the jewel of Rhode Island's old money scene. Elegant, discreet, and ruthlessly family-run. But like all glittering surfaces, ours was thin. Scratch too hard and you hit the rot. Growing up, I was obedient. I was the good child, which, in Riley terms, meant invisible. I colored inside the lines, wore the shoes my mother picked, and kept my voice soft at dinners. I was the girl who knew better than to ask questions. Meanwhile, Trevor, my brother, the crown prince, could have lit the house on fire and been praised for his initiative. When he got suspended from boarding school for throwing a party that ended with 2 arrests and a broken window, my father's only reaction was, "Boys will be boys. At least he's social." When I got into Wharton, my mother's response was, "Is that really necessary? You'll probably just get married by 30 anyway." Their expectations for me were lower, but their scrutiny was relentless. I wasn't allowed to date blue-collar boys. I was discouraged from choosing finance over fine arts. When I wore navy to a charity event instead of the Riley signature cream palette, I was pulled aside and told, "You're not dressing like someone who represents this family." That line haunted me for years. Because deep down, I did want to represent the family. I wanted to belong. So I worked harder, always harder. By 26, I'd climbed my way into the company's inner circle, not because anyone opened doors for me, but because I forced them open with data, strategy, and quiet wins. When Trevor fumbled a major expansion in Charleston, blowing past zoning deadlines and alienating half the city council, it was me who flew down and repaired the relationships. I rewrote the contracts, smoothed the egos, landed the deal. Publicly, the press release credited Trevor. Privately, he told me, grinning, "That's what little sisters are for." And my parents, they sent him a bottle of Macallan. They sent me silence. That was the Riley pattern. Trevor got praise, perks, power. I got paperwork. Still, I stayed. Because somewhere in me, some part still believed that if I just did enough, saved enough, proved enough, maybe they'd finally see me. But here's the truth. People who only love you conditionally will always find new conditions. Enter Eric. We met at a boutique hotel expo in Miami. He was an architect consulting for a green hospitality firm, passionate, scruffy, and 10 times more grounded than anyone I'd met in my circle. He listened more than he talked. He asked about my work without assuming I was helping my dad. He treated me like a person, not a pawn. And when we started dating, for the first time, I stopped shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. My mother hated him instantly. Not for anything he did, but for what he wasn't. He didn't come from legacy. His parents were school teachers in Philadelphia. He wore flannel on Sundays. He once brought a casserole to a family brunch instead of wine. To her, he was beneath me. To me, he was real. Eric proposed on a crisp October afternoon, right at the duck pond in Boston Public Garden. No photographers, no audience. Just him, me, and a vintage diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I cried, not because it was flashy, but because it meant something. We sent out invitations that winter. Simple, letterpress, engraved in navy and cream. I mailed them to every member of my family. I picked their seats at the ceremony. I saved them front row. Because no matter how many times they disappointed me, a part of me still hoped this could be the turning point. Maybe weddings soften people, I told myself. Maybe they'll show up. They didn't show up. But worse than that, worse than the silence, the absence, the missed RSVPs was the calculated cruelty of it all. See, I didn't realize until much later that this wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was punishment. A way of saying you chose him over us. Now see how that feels. A way of asserting control, one final time, not by yelling, not by confrontation, but by sheer surgical abandonment. And they wanted me to feel it. How do I know? Because the night before the wedding, Trevor posted a boomerang of their champagne toast in Maui with the caption, "Family first, always." A subtle dagger, polished, curated, public. And it worked. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the hotel desk, staring at the place cards I'd written in perfect cursive weeks ago. Charles Riley Diana, Riley Trevor, Riley Laura, and Robert Jessica. Each one a monument to a fantasy I should have let go years ago. But here's the part they didn't plan on. They thought that leaving me behind would break me. Instead, it woke me up. I began to see the structure for what it was. A hierarchy I was never meant to win. A ladder where every rung pulled me further from who I really was. And I started thinking, what would happen if I stopped climbing? What if I stepped off? Because if I had nothing to lose anymore, then I finally had everything to gain. The wedding went on. It wasn't the day I had imagined. No glowing toasts from proud parents, no tearful hugs from my brother, no family photo with smiling faces behind me, but it was real. And in some strange, painful way, it was also freeing. Every empty chair in the front row spoke louder than applause ever could. It told the truth, that I had spent 3 decades chasing approval from people who never planned to give it. And now, finally, I was done begging. But that didn't mean I was done. Not even close. The days after the wedding felt oddly silent. Eric and I flew to Vermont for a short honeymoon, just the two of us. No social media, no questions. The resort was tucked in the mountains, surrounded by trees just beginning to blush orange. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I found myself waking at 3 a.m., my body clenched, heart pounding. I kept reliving the moment I opened my phone and saw that post from Maui. The way my mom's message landed like a gavel. Don't expect anyone to show. 6 words that ended a chapter I didn't even realize was closing. Eric noticed, of course. He always does. He'd hold my hand as we walked forest trails, or pour wine by the fire, waiting for me to talk. I didn't nod at first, but by the 3rd night, I finally asked, "Do you think they ever loved me?" He didn't rush to answer. He just said, "I think they loved a version of you that made them feel powerful. But the real you, the strong, independent one who stopped playing their game, that version scares them." It clicked. That was exactly it. I hadn't changed, I just stopped pretending. I had made a choice to live life on my own terms, and that made me inconvenient, especially for a family obsessed with legacy. When we returned to Newport, the messages started. Polite, performative, strategic. A bouquet of white orchids from my mother arrived at our apartment with a pre-printed card. "Congratulations. Best wishes. The Rileys." Not signed. No apology. Not even a mention of the wedding day. Trevor sent a voice note, 47 seconds of him explaining how timing just didn't work out, and they were already booked months ahead for the Maui trip. He said, "Next time you plan something big, give us more notice." Next time. Like missing my wedding was a calendar error. Then came the kicker, he added. "Anyway, glad you're happy. Send pics." I stared at the phone in disbelief. They weren't sorry. They weren't embarrassed. They were calculating. And that's when I understood this wasn't over. They had carefully staged their absence. They made it a message. Now, they wanted me to fold back into the system gracefully, quietly, without making a fuss. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I went back to work at Riley Hospitality the following Monday. No one said anything outright, but I felt the shift. Meetings that used to start with pleasantries now opened with icy efficiency. My father's executive assistant forgot to include me on 2 critical email chains. Trevor scheduled a board meeting during a presentation I had spent weeks preparing. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. One afternoon, I walked into the conference room for a strategic review, only to find they'd moved the meeting to the executive lounge upstairs, without telling me. When I arrived late, out of breath, my father raised an eyebrow. "You're always so dramatic, Sophia." I froze. The room was full of VPs, department heads, consultants, most of whom had once respected me. Now their silence was a wall. Trevor smirked. "Let's stay focused. Some of us have real deliverables." I clenched my jaw, bit my tongue, and sat down. My hands trembled beneath the table. They wanted me to crack, to explode, to prove I didn't belong in their inner circle. But I'd learned something valuable on my honeymoon: when they go cold, you go calculated. That night, I sat at our kitchen counter with a glass of Pinot Noir and my laptop. Eric leaned against the sink. "You working?" I nodded, just reevaluating some structure. "What kind of structure?" I closed my laptop slowly, looked him in the eye. Power. For so long, I thought I had to play by their rules to win. But now, I saw a different path. One they couldn't see coming because they didn't believe I was capable of thinking like them. I was the underestimated daughter, the overlooked analyst, and that made me the most dangerous person in the room. Because I had access, I had leverage, and now I had motive. The next morning, I changed my routine. Instead of heading straight to HQ, I took a detour to the city courthouse and requested a copy of our company's corporate bylaws. Then I spent the entire day reviewing our ownership structure. Turns out Riley Hospitality wasn't as airtight as they liked to pretend. My shares, while minority, were enough to trigger specific audit powers. And with Trevor's recent reckless spending, like that mysterious six-figure consulting fee in LA, there were cracks in the marble. Cracks I could exploit. Back at the office, I played it cool, attended meetings, smiled when spoken to. I was careful, quiet, invisible again, but this time by design. What they didn't know was that I had already started compiling a dossier. A full breakdown of financial discrepancies, backdoor deals, HR violations. Trevor had swept under the rug. Even emails where my mother bypassed compliance to greenlight personal expenses through the company fund. I wasn't going to expose them, yet. I was going to own them first. But to do that, I needed help, the right kind of help. Someone who knew the system, but had no loyalty to the Riley name. And I knew exactly who to call. I didn't grow up believing in allies. In the Riley world, everything was about hierarchy. Even our family dinners felt like boardroom negotiations. You didn't confide. You didn't expose weakness. You played your role, earned your keep, and watched your back. So when I made that call, when I reached out to the one person I wasn't supposed to, it felt like stepping off a cliff. But that's the thing about cliffs. Sometimes, when you fall, you learn how to fly. Her name was Cassandra Holt. She used to be my father's CFO. Smart, exacting, a numbers whisperer in 5-inch heels. She ran Riley Hospitality's financial core for over a decade until, suddenly, she didn't. One day, she was there, sharp as ever. The next, gone. The official story was early retirement. But I remembered things. Whispers. A fight behind closed doors. Cassandra leaving the building with her shoulders stiff and her jaw locked. Back then, I was too junior to ask questions. Now I had questions and leverage. It took me 2 days to find her. She ran a private consulting firm in Boston now, working mostly with startups and luxury boutique hotels that wanted to scale without selling their souls. I emailed her once a single sentence. "Would you consider helping me audit the empire that pushed us both out?" She replied in 8 minutes. Where and when? We met at a rooftop cafe halfway between Boston and Newport. I wore black. She wore steel gray. Neither of us smiled at first. It felt less like a reunion and more like an arms deal. She stirred her coffee once, then looked at me with those cool, intelligent eyes. "You're not just angry," she said. "You're ready." I nodded. They left 6 seats empty on my wedding day. Something flickered in her expression. Not pity, recognition. Then let's get to work. Cassandra didn't just understand the system. She built half of it. She knew which shell companies they used to move money, which audit loopholes they used to delay accountability, which board members were loyal to the family name, and which ones were just waiting for a reason to jump ship. She also knew Trevor's weaknesses, his taste for flashover function, his lazy delegation, his tendency to overwrite emails with too much detail when he was nervous. He's arrogant, she told me. That's predictable. But your mother, that's the wild card. I exhaled slowly. She sees everything, but never touches the mess herself. Cassandra smiled thinly. Then let's hand her a mirror. We developed a 3-phase plan. Phase 1, document everything, not just financial irregularities, but personal misuse of company assets. Lavish parties billed as client engagement, corporate cards used for designer shoes, private charter flights, art auctions. Phase 2, isolate weak points. Trevor's unauthorized hiring of an old frat buddy as strategic advisor with a 6-figure salary and 0 deliverables. The Maui resort project riddled with zoning issues. And most important, the LA property quietly bleeding money with no explanation. Phase 3, leverage my shares and whistleblower protections to trigger a formal internal review, one they couldn't block without exposing themselves.
It was legal. It was surgical.
And it was going to hurt. Of course, I still had to play my role at the office. Smile in the hallway, sit in meetings, take notes, pretend to fumble just enough to keep Trevor smug. The tension between us was growing. He noticed I was calmer, too calm. You've been quiet lately, he said one afternoon, leaning against the edge of my office door. I've been observing, I replied. You'd be surprised how much people reveal when you let them think you're not paying attention. He chuckled. Still the creepy little genius, huh? I smiled back. Better than being the incompetent golden boy. His eyes narrowed, just a little. Then he left. He didn't know it yet, but I had already requested access logs for our shared drive, confirming he'd altered financial records for 2 acquisitions, sloppily, predictably. All I needed now was timing. Then came the twist I hadn't planned for. Cassandra called me at 10 p.m., voice low but urgent. I just reviewed a flagged transfer from the Riley Foundation. The nonprofit. Yes, and it's not just sloppy, it's potentially criminal. She forwarded the documents. And there it was, a $450,000 donation wired to a shell company registered in the Caymans, disguised as a sustainability grant, signed off by Diana Riley, my mother. I froze. It was one thing to expose Trevor's idiocy, but my mother, she was the queen on the board. Removing her would change the game entirely. Do you want to use this? Cassandra asked. I hesitated. My hand trembled over the keyboard. She'd ruined so much my confidence, my sense of worth, my wedding day. But somewhere, deep down, I still wanted her to be better than this. Then I remembered her message. Don't expect anyone to show. She hadn't just skipped my wedding. She orchestrated their absence. She planned it, pressed send. And now, she'd pressed transfer. I looked at Cassandra. Load the bullet! But before we could pull the trigger, we needed to make sure one thing was true. That when the storm hit, I wouldn't be standing alone. And that meant bringing someone inside the company into the circle. Someone who could move quietly, access files I couldn't, feed intel. Someone who knew the system but didn't know the Rileys anything anymore. So I made one final call. To someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who left the company in silence. Bruised, but not broken. And when they picked up, I said just 5 words. You still want justice. The pause on the other end was brief. Then, I never stopped. The plan was simple, surgical, no room for error. Phase 1 was already in motion. The evidence against Trevor was piling up hundreds of pages of transactions, contracts he couldn't explain, an email chain that was going to destroy his carefully constructed golden boy image. But there was something bigger at play now. I wasn't just going after Trevor anymore. I was going after everything. It's funny how fast everything can change once you stop playing by their rules, once you stop letting them define you. For years, I had been Sophia Riley, daughter of Charles and Diana. the girl who couldn't do anything right in their eyes. But that version of me, the one who obeyed their expectations, who worked and got nothing in return, she was dead. Now I was Sophia the strategist, the silent storm. I spent the next few days digging through Riley Hospitality's financials with Cassandra's help, combing through every account and every document. Every time I uncovered something, I felt a little bit of the weight I'd been carrying my whole life lift off my shoulders. But then, the cracks started to show. Trevor wasn't as dumb as he looked. He had started to catch on. A few things seemed off: the way he glared at me in meetings, the way his voice lost that cocky tone whenever I spoke up. It was like a game of chess, the kind where you know the opponent has already seen your move, but you make it anyway. And wait, when you're up against people who think they have all the power, the trick is not to rush it, to let them believe they've won, to let them think you're still following their script. But here's where things got really interesting. It was Wednesday morning when the first bomb dropped. I was sitting in the conference room, reviewing some final numbers for the quarterly report. The air was thick with tension. Trevor was there, of course. And my father, the silent emperor of the board, sat at the head of the table with that cold, distant look he always wore when he didn't want to acknowledge anything beneath him. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. It was an alert from our internal system, a flagged transaction. I opened the message. $500,000 transferred to a shell company in the Caymans, registered under the name of the Riley Legacy Fund. But it wasn't a donation. Not this time. It was a payout. A hush filled the room. My stomach dropped. I looked up, catching my father's eyes across the table. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker. But then I saw Trevor's face. He went pale. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. The silence hung in the air like a thick fog. I didn't hesitate. I sent the alert to Cassandra immediately. She was already at her desk, working the legal side, ready to execute. We had the ammunition we needed. All I had to do now was pull the trigger. But timing was key. Timing always was. A few minutes later, my father stood and dismissed the meeting. He didn't look at me as he did it. Didn't acknowledge the fact that I had just uncovered a massive financial crime under his roof. It was like nothing had happened. But it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The next day, the game shifted. Cassandra called me around lunchtime. Her voice was tight, but controlled. "You need to move fast," she said. "I just got a call from one of your father's advisors. They know something's wrong. Trevor's asking questions. They're panicking." "Did you get the backup?" I asked, heart pounding. "I have it," she replied. "But you need to get to your mother. Now." That was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating. It was time to bring Diana Riley into this. She was the puppet master, the one who pulled all the strings. And she had always been the one I couldn't touch. I'd spent my whole life trying to get her approval, trying to please her. But now it was time to see if she would stand with her son, or if she would finally realize who the real threat to the empire was. I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. The marble floors glinted under the chandeliers in the foyer. The smell of fresh-cut flowers in the entryway, it was always so perfectly them. But as I stepped into the grand hallway, I felt like I was walking into a different world, a world that I was no longer part of. My mother was in the sitting room, looking every bit the Queen of Newport in her white silk blouse and perfectly styled hair. She glanced up as I walked in. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone clipped. "You have work." "I need to talk to you." She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" I paused. The words I had prepared suddenly seemed foreign. How do you accuse the woman who gave you life of being complicit in a financial conspiracy? How do you expose the woman who, for years, made you believe you weren't enough? "You and Trevor have been stealing from the company. I have proof," I said, my voice steady, but my heart racing. I'm going to make sure everyone knows. Her face went cold. The familiar mask slipped into place. You wouldn't do that. You're not like them. I shook my head. I'm exactly like them. The only difference is, I know what the truth looks like. And then I pulled out the folder that contained everything. The receipts, the emails, the transfers, everything. Her expression faltered just for a second. Then she stood up, smoothing her blouse. Your father will hear about this, she said, her voice low and controlled. I think your husband already knows, I said, watching her carefully. But I don't think it matters anymore. Her eyes narrowed. You think you can just walk in here and destroy everything we built? I took a deep breath, the words heavy in my mouth. I didn't destroy it. You did. And now, I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are. Just as she stepped toward the door, there was a knock. My heart skipped a beat. Come in, I said, voice barely a whisper. The door opened slowly, and standing there, in the doorway, was none other than Trevor. The air in the room shifted the second Trevor stepped through the door. It wasn't just his presence. It was the weight of everything unspoken. The years of competition, of rivalry masked as family, suddenly laid bare. His eyes flicked between my mother and me, scanning us like we were pawns on a chessboard. His expression didn't waver. He was the golden child. The Riley legacy wrapped in a tailored suit. A man who thought everything in his world was designed to bend to his will. But today he was no longer in control. Trevor's voice faltered as he saw the folder on the table between my mother and me. A folder full of damning evidence that would topple his carefully constructed empire. You were just what, Trevor? I asked, my tone sharper than I expected. Here to finish what you started. He gave a tight smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sophia, you know I'm not the one you should be worried about. You've got your sights set on the wrong person. I let out a bitter laugh. You think this is about you? This is about the truth, Trevor, the truth you've been hiding for years. My mother's face tightened, her usual composure cracking for just a moment. She wasn't the ice queen anymore. She was the woman who realized her empire was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. This is absurd, she said, her voice low and calculated. You think anyone will believe you, Sophia? You're just a disgruntled daughter trying to tear apart everything we've built. Everything you built, I corrected. Not we. You and Trevor have been running this company like a dictatorship, with the rest of us playing your game. But I'm not playing anymore. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. But I held my ground. Trevor shifted uncomfortably, stepping closer. You really think you can just expose this and walk away, don't you? There are bigger forces at play here. Sophia, you're out of your depth. I know exactly what I'm doing. I shot back. And if I have to burn the whole thing down to show everyone who's been pulling the strings, then so be it. The look in his eyes darkened. It was no longer the smug confidence of the golden boy. It was something else, something far more dangerous. You think you've got the upper hand, Trevor sneered. You think this is just about a few shady transactions and some bad financial choices. This is about legacy. Sophia, this is about family. And you're not even part of it. Not really. The words cut deep. Because deep down, I knew he was right. For years, I had been the outsider. The daughter who couldn't live up to the name. The one who wasn't worthy of the Riley legacy. But I'd been working in the shadows for months now. And I wasn't the same person who used to beg for their approval. I had the power. I had the truth. And I was going to make sure the world saw it. I stood up, locking eyes with both of them. You want to talk about legacy, I said, my voice ice cold. Let's talk about what happens when that legacy starts to crumble. because it's going to, and you're not going to be able to stop it." My mother didn't respond. She couldn't. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. She knew it, too. The walls were closing in. But just as I thought I had her cornered, something unexpected happened. The phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was an unlisted number. A chill ran down my spine. I answered without hesitation. "Sophia," came the voice on the other end, a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. "It's time to pull the trigger." I recognized it instantly. It was Paul, my brother-in-law. I froze. Paul had been the outsider in the family. He never quite fit into the Riley mold, and that made him the perfect ally. But I hadn't expected him to get involved, not like this. Not now. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my heart racing.
"I've been monitoring their moves, and I've just learned something that could finish this. We're not just dealing with bad business, Sophia. We're dealing with something much bigger."
I could feel the weight of his words as they sank in. This wasn't just about a few shady transactions. It wasn't just about Trevor's careless mistakes. This was about something that could bring everything crashing down, and I was standing right in the middle of it. "What do you need from me?" I asked, trying to steady my breathing. "Meet me tonight," Paul said, his voice low. "I'll explain everything. But you have to trust me. This is bigger than you think." I hung up without another word. Trevor was still standing there, his gaze burning into me. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint it. He was too confident in his position, too sure that he had the power to silence me. But he didn't know about Paul. He didn't know about the cards I was about to play. That night, I left my apartment just before midnight, my heart pounding as I drove through the empty streets of Newport. My hands clenched the steering wheel, but my mind was elsewhere, on the meeting, on the plan, on everything I was about to risk. I parked outside a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place Paul always used for clandestine meetings. He was already waiting at a corner table, a dark figure in the shadows. I walked in, my pulse racing, and took a seat across from him.
"Talk to me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me.
Paul leaned forward, his eyes serious. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Sophia, and now I need to make sure you're ready for what's coming." He slid a folder across the table, a folder with everything. The file was thicker than I expected. The weight of it felt like more than just paper. It felt like the final chapter of a story I never wanted to be a part of. I stared at the folder Paul handed me. The dim light in the cafe flickered above us, casting long shadows over the table. I opened it slowly, my heart racing, knowing that every page was a doorway to a truth I couldn't avoid. Inside were details intimate, damning details of every illicit deal, every backdoor contract, every shady transaction that had kept the Riley family empire afloat. It wasn't just the financial missteps I already knew about. This was deeper. There were political connections, hidden alliances, offshore accounts used for money laundering, and corporate espionage. There was even mention of my father's strategic involvement in sabotaging competitors to clear the way for Riley Hospitality's expansion. But it was the last page that caught my breath. At the very bottom of the page, in small, neat handwriting, was the name Eric Thompson. I froze. Paul watched me closely, his expression unreadable. He knew I'd find it. That's why he'd brought me here. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was a personal betrayal. "How is Eric involved?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Paul leaned back, his fingers tapping on the table, as if the question had been expected. "That's the bombshell. It turns out your mother isn't just tangled in the web. Eric's been a pawn in their game for years. He didn't know it, but his father's firm was used to funnel money through the Riley Foundation for years." I blinked, my thoughts scrambling to catch up. My stomach dropped. Eric, the man I'd thought I could trust above all others, was implicated. But how? Why?
Paul continued. When Eric's company started making significant strides in the market, your mother, she saw an opportunity. She used him to get inside access
To the resources Riley couldn't easily acquire. She kept him at arm's length, controlled him through his father's firm. And now, she's in too deep. She needs to keep him close. Or he might expose everything. The weight of his words hit me hard. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. My own mother had used Eric as a tool in her empire-building games, feeding him half-truths and keeping him on a leash. I'd never seen it coming. The silence between us stretched long, thick with the implications. Finally, I found my voice. So tishata. What now? What do we do with all this?
Paul's eyes softened for the first time. We strike first, before they figure out we're on to them.
I drove back to my apartment in a daze. The streets of Newport blending together in a blur of streetlights and darkened storefronts. The realization was starting to sink in, but I still couldn't believe it. My mother, the woman who'd always held me at arm's length, always pushed me to be better, to be perfect, had been using me as a pawn in her grand game for control. And now Eric had been swept up in it, without even realizing it. I couldn't even call him. I couldn't even look at him without seeing what had been kept hidden from me all this time. And then there was my father sitting silently in his ivory tower, completely unaware of what was happening beneath his nose. Or was he? The truth was clearer now than ever before. If I wanted to break free, to finally end this cycle of manipulation, there was no one left to trust but myself. When I arrived at my apartment, I immediately started working. I called Cassandra, who had been waiting for me to make the next move.
We need to move fast. The documents I gave you, they're just the start. I've got someone else lined up to take care of the legal side. But we can't wait for the board meeting next week.
We'll expose it all tonight, she said, her voice calm but urgent. I ran my fingers through my hair, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I'm in. Let's do it. Good. You're going to need backup, Cassandra continued. Call in some favors. People at the law firm, at the bank. Get them on our side before this goes public.
I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone and called the first person on my list, someone who had always respected me, even if they never truly understood why I kept fighting. Someone I knew I could count on now.
The night was growing darker, and the weight of the decisions ahead was pressing on my chest. I was about to expose everything I'd worked so hard to protect: the family, the company, the empire. But there was no other way. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been crushed beneath the weight of the Riley name. And it was time to bring it all down.
I looked at the clock. 11:00 p.m. The team would be arriving soon, ready to execute the plan.
I opened my laptop, checking the final documents. Every name on the list was a name I knew well, people who had turned a blind eye for far too long. But this time, they wouldn't have the luxury of ignorance. This time, it was my turn to make the rules. I heard a knock at the door. I didn't need to check the peephole. I knew who it was. My heart skipped a beat. Eric. I opened the door, and he stood there, looking uncertain, like he was about to apologize, but unsure of how to begin.
"Can we talk?" he asked softly.
I took a breath. Yes, we can talk.
And with that, the storm inside me began to swirl. My plan was already in motion, but this was personal. This was the moment I would decide if I could still trust the man who had stood beside me for so long, or if I needed to face the truth that there had never been any trust at all.
Story 2. My name is Harper Williams. I'm 22 years old, and just a few days ago, I graduated from Harvard. No, not some online course or honorary certificate. I walked across the stage, in the cap and gown I bought secondhand, to receive a degree I paid for with my own blood. sweat, and absolutely no help from the people who should have been in the front row cheering me on my parents. Instead, they were in Southern California, signing the paperwork for a brand new Bentley Continental GT. Not for themselves, not for a business partner, for my sister Cassandra.
She's 18, just finished high school. Barely.
And when I called last week to confirm our graduation plans, my dad didn't hesitate. "Take the bus," he said. "We're buying your sister a Bentley."
No, we're proud of you. No, sorry. Sweetie, we'll make it up to you.
Just take the bus. If you've ever been the afterthought in your own family, if you've ever worked 3 times harder just to be ignored, smash that like button and drop a comment with where you're watching from, because this story is for every invisible child who built a future in silence.
Let me take you back to where it all began. Atherton, California, zip code 94027, one of the wealthiest in America, where Teslas are the new Toyotas and appearances matter more than empathy. From the outside, we were a power family. My dad, Robert Williams, was a venture capital partner who could make or break a startup with a single handshake. My mom, Elizabeth, was chair of neurology at Stanford Medical. She had her own Wikipedia page by the time I turned 10. And me, I was their firstborn, the trial run, the example child. At least until Cassandra was born. I still remember the day they brought her home. I was 4. I had a construction paper crown I made in preschool. And I stood in the driveway, waiting to show it off. But when the car door opened and sunlight caught the golden curls on that baby's head, the crown didn't matter anymore. From that moment on, I became the footnote. It started subtle. On my 8th birthday, I got a boxed set of educational coding books to get a head start. They said, 2 months later, Cassandra turned 4. She got a full-scale princess party. Pony, bounce house, event photographer. Her dress cost more than my entire wardrobe. I told myself it was just an age thing, that maybe she'd get the books later. But she never did, and I never got the pony. Over the years, the differences stacked up like bricks between us. Vacations. Wherever Cassandra wanted to go, I once begged to skip the annual family beach trip and attend a robotics camp in Seattle. My mom touched my hair gently, the way she always did when softening a no. "Maybe next year, Harper." Next year never came. In school, I worked like my life depended on it. Straight A's, mathletes, debate team, AP classes stacked like Jenga blocks. I'd get my report card and slide it across the dinner table. My dad would glance, nod once. "That's expected," he'd say, flipping the page of his Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, Cassandra would bring home a C in geometry, and they'd celebrate like she'd cured cancer. She tried so hard my mom would beam. That teacher's unreasonable anyway. I started to understand the unspoken rule. My success was mandatory. Hers was optional and always celebrated. The worst part, I didn't even hate her. Cassandra wasn't cruel. She didn't rub it in. She just absorbed the world that was handed to her. When she crashed her first car at 16, a brand new Audi, my dad gave her just to get around. He replaced it the next day without a word. When I asked for help buying a used Honda for college, he said, "You're smart. Work a summer job. You'll figure it out." But the final blow came during my high school graduation. I'd been named valedictorian. 4 years of pressure and performance and pushing myself so hard, I got stress-induced eczema and chronic migraines. I told them the ceremony was Tuesday evening. My mom's face fell. "Oh, Harper, that's the same night as Cassandra's piano recital. She's been practicing so hard." She said it like it was obvious, like of course they wouldn't come. I stood on that podium in front of hundreds of parents and peers, and I scanned the crowd for faces that weren't there. That was the moment something broke. I had a partial scholarship to Harvard, not enough to live on, but enough to believe the rest could be possible. My parents said they'd see what they could do. I told them not to worry about it. That summer,
While Cassandra posted beach selfies from Maui, I worked 3 jobs.
Barista at Phil's Coffee in the morning, receptionist at a dental office in the afternoon, online math tutor at night.
I saved every dollar, ate dollar store pasta, wore the same 2 pairs of jeans. And when August came, I packed my 2 suitcases and called a Lyft to the airport. They were surprised.
"You don't want us to drive you?" my mom asked.
I smiled.
"No need. I've got it covered."
As the driver pulled away, I looked back one last time. My mom stood at the porch, arms folded, expression unreadable. My dad didn't come outside. Inside that car, I felt a strange blend of grief and liberation. I was finally going to build something entirely my own. I thought that would be the hardest part. It wasn't, because Harvard broke me in ways my family never did. And trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next.
I found rock bottom, and someone else who changed everything.
Hit that subscribe button if you're still here, because the best revenge doesn't come with shouting. It comes with silence and headlines. What if I told you the person who helped me rise wasn't my family, my ex, or even a friend, but a stranger who saw in me what my own parents refused to? Harvard was beautiful in that intimidating, icy kind of way. The kind of beauty that makes you straighten your back and check if your shoes are clean. I landed at Logan Airport with 2 overstuffed suitcases and exactly $372 to my name. It was August, humid. The air felt like soup. California heat is dry and sharp. Boston heat wraps around your neck like a wet scarf. I remember dragging my bags across the cobblestone toward the dorms, watching other freshmen get dropped off by moms with Pinterest-perfect trunks. Their dads carried mini fridges and gave them crisp $100 bills, just in case.
Me, I had a half-empty box of protein bars and a secondhand comforter I bought on Craigslist.
My dorm room was a shared triple, barely larger than my childhood closet. The mattress squeaked like it had trauma. The desk chair was missing a wheel. But it was mine. I'd made it, on my own. That first night, I cried into my pillow, not because I was homesick, but because for the first time in my life, there was no one there to ignore me. By the second week, I had 3 jobs lined up. Early mornings at Phil's Coffee, where I learned the art of smiling at people who mispronounce your name while demanding almond milk lattes. Evenings with DoorDash, racing my bike through snow or rain, praying the delivery tip would be more than $2. And late nights tutoring high school kids in calculus online, usually while eating cold ramen in a hoodie that still smelled like espresso. I barely slept, but every time I saw Harvard University on my ID card, I reminded myself, you're not supposed to be here. And that's exactly why you are.
Somewhere around midterms, I met Jessica Rodriguez.
We'd both shown up to a free dinner talk about student finance stress, mostly for the free pizza. She wore a denim jacket patched with hand-stitched flowers and carried a backpack held together by duct tape and hope. She sat next to me and said, "You look like you've cried into that sweatshirt before." I blinked, then laughed. We bonded instantly. Turns out we were both invisible daughters, me to a rich family who wanted a decoration, her to a working-class household that didn't believe daughters should dream beyond a paycheck. Jessica's dad was a mechanic. Her mom cleaned houses in Arizona. She'd gotten into Harvard on a full ride, with nothing but grit and FAFSA. But what made us sisters wasn't where we came from. It was what we were fighting toward freedom. We became each other's survival kit. She'd bring me leftover tamales her mom mailed in foil-lined boxes. I'd share my rare moments of silence with her during laundry room breakdowns. When winter came, we shared a space heater and told stories to stay awake while studying. There was one night, 3 a.m., snow against the window. Bills stacked between us, and Jessica looked at me and said, "Harper, you know you don't have to earn love, not even from your family." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure she was right. Meanwhile, back in California, Cassandra had become an influencer.
With my parents' money. Of course. She posted skincare tutorials filmed in our marble bathroom, bikini hauls from our poolside deck. Her captions were full of faux depth. Just remember, you're enough even if you don't feel like it. She had over 200,000 followers, brand deals, sponsored teeth whitening kits. One day she went viral for crying on live when she scratched her third car, a white Range Rover Velar. I watched from a flickering campus Wi-Fi connection, wrapped in 2 thrifted blankets, trying to keep the cold out. The contrast made my stomach turn. I emailed my mom once. Subject line, "Can you help with books this semester?" No reply. Cassandra posted a story the next day. Her at Nobu Malibu. Tagline, "When you know your worth." I closed the laptop and sat in silence. Even the ramen I was eating felt heavy. There was a girl in the hallway singing softly, some song about home, and I realized, in that moment, I didn't know what home was anymore. Maybe I never had. But I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to build something that couldn't be ignored, priced out, or stolen. That seed didn't grow overnight, but it was watered every time I was left out, overlooked, forgotten. Every dollar I earned, every extra shift I worked, every time I told a professor I couldn't afford the textbook and they slid me a PDF, that was me planting roots. I started reading beyond class, articles about blockchain, decentralized finance, digital equity. I didn't understand half of it at first, but something about the idea giving financial control back to the people sparked something deep in me. Maybe it was the thought that no one should have to beg for support. Maybe it was the fantasy of never needing to hear "we can't help you" again. Either way, I dove in. And that's when I met Professor Julia Wilson. It happened during an elective on emerging financial systems. She was guest lecturing on cryptocurrency regulation. Her voice was calm but razor sharp, like a scalpel laced with espresso. She didn't care about small talk. She cared about ideas. And when I asked a question about data integrity in decentralized ledgers, she looked at me like I had just kicked a hole in the wall in a good way. After class, she pulled me aside. "You've lived with the consequences of broken systems, haven't you?" I didn't know what to say, but I nodded. "Good," she said. "Then you know what needs fixing." She told me to come to her office hours. She handed me a list of books. She didn't pity me. She expected something from me. And that terrified me, but it also felt like the first real invitation I'd ever gotten. Around this time, the school announced that parents could pre-order graduation VIP seating, front row access, optional photo package, even a catered brunch. I thought, maybe they'll come this time. Maybe I've done enough now. So I called home. My mom answered. The background noise was loud, sounded like a car dealership. I asked, "Hey, are you guys planning to come to graduation?" There was a pause. Then my dad's voice came on the line. "Sweetheart, Cassandra's birthday is that weekend. We're surprising her with a car. It's kind of a big deal." I laughed, like nervous, cracking laugh. "A car. A Bentley," he said proudly. "She's earned it. 18's a milestone." I said nothing. He added, "You've always been so independent. We figured you'd understand." I hung up, and I didn't cry. Instead, I looked at the empty chair across from me, Jessica's chair. She was out that night working a shift at a diner. I imagined that seat at graduation reserved for them, and then decided I'd keep it empty. A symbol, not of who failed to show up, but of who didn't need to anymore. What came next wasn't revenge. Not yet. First, I needed a plan and a platform. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after you stop begging to be seen. Not peaceful, not loud, just hollow. After that call, the Bentley call, something inside me shut off, not out of rage, out of exhaustion.
I was done hoping. But being done with hope doesn't mean you stop feeling. I still felt the sting when Cassandra posted her birthday reveal video, her squeals echoing off the marble garage floors. Our parents cheering in the background like she'd just been drafted into the NBA. Caption: Grateful for the best family in the world. Bentley, baby, spoiled, but blessed. Thousands of likes. Comments calling her queen. Meanwhile, I was heating up leftover soup from the campus food pantry. It wasn't just the Bentley. It was the audacity to make it public. As if her wins somehow included us all. And maybe that's what broke me. Not the gift, but the assumption that I was part of that joy. That I should feel happy for her. One night, I came back to the dorm after a double shift, my legs aching, my fingers raw from cold handlebars, and found a package on my bed. No return address. Inside a care package, granola bars, hand lotion, thick socks, and a tiny handmade bracelet. Beads spelled out SISTERHOOD. Jessica had left a note. For the ones we choose, not the ones who chose us wrong. You're not alone, H. I sat on the edge of my bed, bracelet clutched like a lifeline, and cried so hard my chest cramped. Because, for once, someone didn't want me to be grateful for scraps. She wanted me to feel worthy. But while that gesture healed something inside me, the outside world kept cutting. That winter, I got sick. Like, real sick fever, chills, the whole flu parade. I had no insurance. Student health was backed up, so I stayed in bed, shaking under 3 layers of sweatshirts, trying to tutor geometry with a hoarse voice and a pounding skull. I texted my mom, just sick, can't move, any advice? Read, no reply. 3 days later, I got a forwarded photo from a family friend, my parents at the Wine Country Winter Gala, smiling, beaming, dressed to the nines. I stared at their champagne flutes and thought they wouldn't even know if I was gone. But while my body burned, my brain wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about something Professor Wilson had said during a lecture on crypto infrastructure. The future of power belongs to those who understand what the current system is afraid of. And that line hit different when you've been powerless your entire life. I started binging everything I could find: white papers, case studies, fintech forums. Jessica thought I was delirious when I taped graphs to the dorm walls like a conspiracy theorist. But I wasn't unraveling. I was rewiring. Because I realized something: my family didn't just ignore me emotionally. They built their identity on the illusion that they were the providers. The ones with the money, the status, the power. What would happen if I took all those levers and learned how to pull them myself? Over the next few months, I sketched out the blueprint for something I didn't even know how to name yet. It started as a question. What if regular people could use crypto without getting scammed? Most of my classmates were chasing VC money and shiny buzzwords. Me, I was thinking about Jessica's mom, who had to cash her check at a corner store because she didn't trust the bank. Or the janitor I talked to once who said his cousin lost $5,000 in a crypto wallet hack and never recovered it. These weren't edge cases. They were the silent majority. People who needed innovation, not spectacle. So I started building a model. ShieldPay was born on notebook paper, then spreadsheets, then code. Now, let's talk about Jake. I haven't mentioned him in a while. That's on purpose. Jake was my sophomore year boyfriend. Tall, ambitious, golden retriever energy with a hedge fund dad and a Tesla before it was cool. He meant well. He just didn't get it. He'd bring me takeout from Italy, thinking it was romantic, not realizing I was rationing peanut butter. He once offered to pay my rent just for a semester, and when I said no, he said, "Stop being so proud, Harper. It's okay to let someone take care of you." No, it wasn't about pride, it was about principle. I didn't want to be rescued. I wanted to be respected. So I broke it off. And a week later, I saw him on Instagram at Coachella with Cassandra. Apparently,
They'd connected at a family fundraiser.
That betrayal. It didn't break me. It clarified me. If I ever had doubts before, they were gone now. This world wasn't going to offer me a seat at the table. I'd have to build my own. But you don't build alone. You need believers. And my first real believer outside of Jessica was still Professor Wilson. She saw my diagrams and asked questions, challenged me, gave me books on system design and investor psychology. She didn't coddle me, she called me out. You can't just have a sob story. You need a strategy. She was right. I spent weekends at startup meetups and free pitch nights. I worked the 5 a.m. coffee shift in the same hoodie I wore to my midnight coding sessions. And eventually, things started clicking. My prototype worked. My user base grew slowly, from forums, Discord groups, fintech Reddit threads. I had traction. And then, out of nowhere, Professor Wilson connected me with someone big, Arjun Mehta, a former SEC advisor turned impact investor. We met in a windowless conference room over lukewarm tea. He didn't ask about my parents, my past, or my GPA. He just said, "You clearly know the pain, but do you know the scale?" I said, "Give me 6 months." He smiled. "Fine, I'll give you 2. If you show me users and risk models, I'll back you." I walked out of that room buzzing, not from the caffeine, from the possibility. And right as ShieldPay was finally gaining shape, guess who slid into my DMs? Jake? "Hey, heard about your crypto thing. Super proud of you." Proud. Proud. I didn't reply. I just took a screenshot, forwarded it to Jessica, and we both howled laughing. Because here's the thing. The people who ignore you on the way up, they always show up once you're trending. But my favorite moment, the email I got from Harvard's entrepreneurship office. Subject line, "Congrats. Harper, you're a top 5 finalist for Tech Bloom." Tech Bloom was the biggest student startup summit in the Northeast. Demo day, investors, press, exposure. I had 2 weeks to prep. No budget, no team, just a prototype, a dream, and relentless rage turned focus. And then I got a text from my dad. Just 5 words. "Heard about ShieldPay. Let's talk." The text from my father stared back at me like a glitch in the Matrix. "Heard about ShieldPay. Let's talk." 5 words? No punctuation, no apology, not even a congrats. I sat on the bench outside the campus library, snow still crusted on the edge of my boots, phone buzzing in my hand like it had the audacity to suggest this was normal. My stomach flipped. For years, I'd imagined that text. But in those versions, it always followed something human, a letter, a phone call, maybe even an apology. This was not that. This was a man reaching out because I had built something too big to ignore. It wasn't love. It was interest. And in my family, interest only showed up when there was leverage to gain. I didn't respond right away. I needed air, and noise, and Jessica. We ended up in our usual safe spot, that 24-hour diner with cheap coffee and yellow vinyl booths that squeaked when you shifted too hard. I told her about the text. Her eyes widened, but she didn't say wow or "Are you going to call him?" She just asked, "What do you want from them now?" And I realized, for the first time in my life, I had the power to ask that question. I wasn't the girl begging for crumbs anymore. I was the girl with a semi-functioning prototype, a finalist spot at Tech Bloom, and a potential investor in my corner. If my family wanted in, they'd get in line like everyone else. No shortcuts, no blood discounts, and definitely no apologies accepted too late. I crafted my reply like a contract. "Hi, Dad. I'm happy to hear you've taken an interest. I'm prepping for a major summit right now, but I'll be back in the Bay Area next month. Let's schedule something formal, then I'd be open to hearing what you have in mind." He responded in under 10 minutes. "Sounds good. Your mom and I are proud. We'd love to be part of whatever's next." Proud. There it was. Not when I was tutoring 5 kids a night to afford textbooks. Not when I made the dean's list 4 semesters straight. Not when I got sick alone in a dorm room and still delivered code reviews on time. No, they were proud now, because now I could make them look good. I printed that message and pinned it above my desk, not out of sentiment, as evidence, because from this moment forward, I was building everything on intentionality. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be calculated. So here was the plan. Step 1, win Tech Bloom. Or at least leave such a mark that ShieldPay became synonymous with ethical fintech. That meant refining my pitch, tightening my UI demo, and preparing for every investor question like it was a cross-examination. Step 2. Quietly vet my dad's business connections. He was still a partner at a prominent VC firm. I knew he'd pitch my name at some point. My daughter's company is the next big thing. If I could get wind of that before it happened, I could redirect. Step 3. Position ShieldPay to thrive with or without them. Arjun was already interested. Professor Wilson had started introducing me to 2 other advisors, one from MIT and one from a microbanking nonprofit. I was building a circle of real believers. People who didn't share my blood but shared my vision. In the weeks leading up to Tech Bloom, I slept less than I had freshman year. But it felt different now. This wasn't survival. This was strategy. I remember one night, 3:17 a.m., Jessica passed out next to me with highlighters stuck in her braid, my laptop buzzing hot under my hands, and I looked at the digital prototype glowing back at me. ShieldPay Beta V0.9. Minimalist, secure, functional. I'd done it, without funding, without favors, without a single meal paid for by my family in 4 years. The silence was no longer hollow.
It was powerful.
2 days before Tech Bloom, I flew back to California. My dad arranged a casual lunch at a private club in Palo Alto. I brought my pitch deck in a brown tote bag, wore a thrifted blazer, and walked in like I owned the building. He greeted me with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Harper, look at you, Harvard woman." My mother kissed the air near my cheek. She was in Lululemon and pearls, like always. We sat. We ordered. They asked no questions about my life. Then he launched in. "So I've been talking to some people about ShieldPay. Lot of interest. I know a few firms that could get you to Series A faster than you can imagine." I nodded slowly. "Do they know your name comes attached?" He smiled wider. "Well, sure. That's the point. We're a family, right?" I let that sit for a moment. Then I pulled out a single piece of paper and slid it across the table. It wasn't a pitch. It was a copy of the clause I'd added to my startup's bylaws just 3 days earlier. No investor with direct familial ties to the founder may hold a controlling equity stake. He blinked. "Harper, this isn't personal." "No," I interrupted calmly. "It's structural. You taught me that." My mom looked between us, lips tight. "I thought we were past all this," she said softly. "We are," I said, meeting her eyes. "That's why I made it official." They didn't raise their voices. That's not how my parents operate. But my dad leaned in, and for the first time in my life, his voice was small. "Do you really want to shut us out? After all we've built?" I smiled. "You didn't build me. You ignored me. There's a difference." I stood up. And in that moment, I wasn't Harper the daughter, or Harper the Harvard student. I was Harper the founder. And I was done asking permission to exist. 2 days later, I walked onto the Tech Bloom stage in front of 400 people, investors, reporters, founders, and told them exactly what I'd built. A fintech tool that would protect everyday users from manipulation. And I told them why it mattered. Not in numbers. In stories. About Jessica's mom. About the janitor. About being left alone in a system designed for those who already had power. The room went still. When I finished, they clapped, slowly at first, then all at once. I didn't win first place, but I won attention. Emails flooded in, opportunities, investors, journalists, collaborators, and my phone, buzzing again. Dad, we're disappointed. Harper, Mom, don't let pride ruin your chance. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted the texts and filed them in a folder on my laptop titled Receipts. The email from my dad kept flashing on my phone, the text almost burning through the screen. You've really gone too far, Harper. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. What I had done, the slow, deliberate steps to dismantle the life they'd built around their influence, was far from too far. It was just enough. I'd spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment, the final execution. The part where everything I had been working for ShieldPay, Tech Bloom, the investors, my team would all crash into a single reality. And the beautiful thing, my parents, they didn't see it coming. The night before Tech Bloom's final demo, I stayed up late with Jessica in our tiny apartment, barely enough space for both our laptops, but plenty for a vision we were both fighting for. Think they'll even notice, she asked, her voice somewhere between nervous and hopeful. I looked up from the final tweak on our pitch deck and met her gaze. They'll have no choice. You see, this wasn't just about ShieldPay anymore. It wasn't even about getting back at them. It was about making sure that no one could ever look at me the way they used to again. I'd spent years waiting for their approval, every failed expectation, every next year. It was all just a game they played because they thought they could control my story. But I'd built my own story now, one that couldn't be rewritten. The morning of Tech Bloom arrived like a storm I was both ready for and dreading. I pulled on the same second-hand blazer I wore to my first meeting with Arjun. The sleeves still a little too long, the fabric a little too worn. But it didn't matter. Not today. Today, I was wearing my success. The event was a frenzy. Tech Bloom was the biggest startup summit in the Northeast. Founders from all over the country, young and hungry, were ready to showcase their groundbreaking ideas. And the investors. The investors were there, hunting for the next big thing. But the thing is, they weren't looking for me. Not at first. I took my seat in the audience, tucked away between a blockchain developer and a food delivery app CEO, just waiting for my turn. I could hear the whispers around me. Did you hear about the Williams kid? She's the one who built the fintech startup? There it was again, the whispers of family. They weren't talking about my skills, my vision, or the team I'd assembled. They were talking about my last name, about how, somehow, the Williams name was supposed to guarantee success. The irony didn't escape me. I had come all the way here, on my own, while they still thought my success was somehow theirs to claim. But the thing about success, it's earned in the quiet, behind the doors, when no one's looking. That's where I'd done my work. Finally, it was my turn. I walked onto the stage, ShieldPay's logo projected behind me, and I took a deep breath. No more hiding. Good morning, I started, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. I'm Harper Williams, and I'm here to tell you about a system that's failed us, and how we can rebuild it. The crowd hushed, unsure at first. You could see the curiosity. People craned their necks to look at the girl who had walked in with the shadow of her last name hanging over her head. I took a step forward. Most of you in this room today have been given a platform, access, funding, connections. I paused, looking at the investors in the front row. My dad's friends, the same men who laughed at my idea when I was younger. But for some of us, most of us, those things don't exist. And if they do, we're excluded. I'm not talking about diversity quotas. I'm talking about real opportunity. I could feel the eyes on me, the tension, the judgment. But I was just getting started. I hit the play button. The screen flickered, and there it was, the demo. The platform we had spent months building. Secure, transparent, simple. For the first time, I didn't just talk about the problem. I showed them how we could fix it. In a clean, sharp presentation, I highlighted the flaws in the current system specifically, the rampant fees and lack of security that impacted the most vulnerable populations. I walked them through how Shield Pay was designed to empower everyday people, those who had been left behind by the financial elite. The room was quiet at first. Then came the questions, not just from the investors, but from everyone. Everyone wanted to know how I'd built this, where I'd gotten my funding, how soon they could get involved. I felt my heart race. This was it. Then, out of nowhere, Jake Thornton, my ex, stood up from his seat in the audience. He wasn't just a former boyfriend. He was the golden child, the one my parents had always hoped I would be, the one who'd stood next to Cassandra at all those fancy fundraisers, looking every bit the part of the heir to the empire. He raised his hand. I froze. "Harper, this is incredible," Jake said, his voice smooth, with that signature smile I once loved. "But you have to ask yourself, can you really compete with the established players? Do you think they'll sit back and let you take over their market share?" I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, the smugness, the challenge. But I didn't back down. I met his eyes, unflinching. "That's exactly the question we're here to answer," I replied, my voice calm. "And I'm not worried about the players who already have their seats at the table. I'm building a table no one's ever had access to before." The crowd shifted. The investors murmured. And for the first time, Jake didn't look so sure of himself. After my pitch, I stayed off stage for a while, letting the buzz simmer. My phone was lighting up with messages. Investors asking for follow-up meetings. Tech blogs requesting interviews. But none of that mattered as much as the real message that I had received that day. My parents. They didn't call. They didn't text. Instead, they sent an email. Subject line: "Harper, we tried to support you. We really did." As the night ended, I sat alone in the back of the conference hall, looking at that email one more time. I thought I was done with them, but what if I wasn't? What if their support wasn't the one thing I needed? I don't think anyone ever tells you how empty winning can feel. It's like standing at the edge of everything you wanted, finally having it within your grasp, and yet, the thrill is hollow. After Tech Bloom, things moved fast. My phone buzzed nonstop: investors, articles, messages from people who had no idea who I was a year ago. But the hardest part, it wasn't the success. It was the sudden silence that followed. My parents didn't call. They didn't congratulate me on the success I'd built from scratch. Instead, they sent an email that hit like a ton of bricks. "Harper, we tried to support you. We really did. But this has gone too far. Let's talk." My first instinct was to throw my phone across the room. "Let's talk." They hadn't wanted to talk for years. Not about me. Not about what I was doing. Not about the path I was carving for myself. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Disappointment was the word that flickered in my mind over and over. I wasn't surprised. I was just done. But there was this sharp edge to the email that cut through everything I was feeling. They were no longer angry with me. They were scared. I knew what I had to do. The decision wasn't hard. It was time to stop being their good daughter, the daughter they could mold and control and dismiss. It was time to stop being the invisible one. And I was going to do that by showing them how I had always been more than their assumptions, more than their expectations, more than the disappointment they had painted me as. But before that, there was one last step in this plan, one final twist. I arranged to meet them, in person. My dad suggested we meet at their country club. The place was as untouchable as they were. White marble floors, servers in crisp black and white uniforms, expensive wine flowing like water.
I agreed. Of course. It was the perfect place to have this conversation.
They probably thought they'd be giving me a lecture on family values or humility, but they had no idea what was coming. I knew exactly what I was going to do. When I walked into that room, they barely looked up from their glasses of Bordeaux. My mother's lips curled into a tight smile. She was still in that pristine yoga outfit, like she'd just stepped out of an Instagram post about wellness. My father, on the other hand, was in a suit that probably cost more than my first car.
Harper, he greeted me coolly. Glad you could join us.
I took a seat, folding my hands neatly on the table in front of me. For the first time in years, I was in control of the narrative. I wasn't that shy, awkward girl trying to earn their love. I wasn't the disappointment. No, I was the CEO of a company they couldn't ignore anymore. I've been thinking, I began, leaning forward, about everything, about Shield Pay, about Tech Bloom, about the emails, and your sudden interest in my work. My father raised an eyebrow. My mother's fingers twitched, but she remained silent. I know you're proud, or at least you say you are, but let me make something crystal clear. You're proud because you see me as your success now, as something you can talk about in boardrooms, as a tool to make yourselves look good. I could see my father's jaw tighten. He was trying to mask his anger, but I could read him like a book. My mother's face, however, had gone pale.
I'm not your prop. I never was.
They exchanged glances, and for the first time, I saw them both unsure. It wasn't comfortable, it was liberating. Then, I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. It wasn't filled with family photos or my personal achievements. It wasn't a letter from Harvard or a press release from Tech Bloom. It was a contract. The same clause I'd added to Shield Pay's official paperwork months ago. No investor with direct familial ties to the founder may hold a controlling equity stake in Shield Pay. I looked at them both, my voice steady. I've worked with people who believe in me, people who see my value beyond my last name. You can't be serious, my father finally said, his voice edged with disbelief. This is family, Harper. You can't just shut us out. I leaned back, my hands still resting calmly in front of me. Watch me. The silence between us was deafening. My parents were rattled. I could tell. They had never not gotten their way before. Their world had always bent to their wills.
But not this time. I've been waiting for an apology. You know? I continued, the bitterness creeping in like the slow drip of a leak. I didn't expect it to come from you. Not after all the times I watched you praise Cassandra for doing half of what I did. The times I begged you to care. The times I fought for your approval. Only to be told next year. You had your chance. And I built something without it. I didn't look at them as I said it. I couldn't. But I didn't need to. The truth was spilling out now, like the cracks in a dam that had been waiting for too long to break. They didn't reply, but I knew they were thinking. Then I got up to leave. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The world that my parents had built around me, it was nothing, because I had built something real, something that wouldn't crumble with their disappointment. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, the chill of the evening seemed to match the cold weight I'd been carrying for so long. But now, I was free. I wasn't bound by their expectations anymore. I had moved on. And so had Shield Pay. I didn't see it coming, though. Not the message that popped up on my phone as I made my way down the sidewalk. It was from Jake Thornton. Harper, I know things have been complicated, but we need to talk. It's about Shield Pay. It's bigger than you realize. I paused. I knew the game he was playing, but was I ready to engage? The message from Jake sat there on my phone, glaring at me in the darkness. The same Jake who once saw me as the one who couldn't let go. The one who wanted to rescue me from a life I didn't need saving from.
The one who thought he could swoop in when things got rough, and I'd just fall back into the old role I'd been shoved into for years. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd built something they all doubted. And yet, here he was, trying to manipulate his way back in.
Harper, I know things have been complicated, but we need to talk. It's about Shield Pay. It's bigger than you realize.
I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Was he trying to offer me help? Did he think he could still fix things for me? Or was he just another person, still seeing me as someone to control? I didn't reply right away. I couldn't. Instead, I locked my phone and slipped it back into my jacket pocket. I had a lot to think about, and I needed to finish what I had started. The next morning, I was standing in the lobby of a downtown San Francisco skyscraper. Shield Pay had secured its first big meeting with a major venture capital firm, the type of firm that people like my dad would kill to have any stake in. And I was walking in there as the founder, not the daughter. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on me. The air in the lobby was crisp, cold, like a snapshot of success in its purest form. The glass walls reflected my image back at me, sharp and clear. This was it. Everything I'd worked for, every long night spent coding, every meal I skipped, every painful rejection from my own family. It had all led here. The doors to the conference room opened, and there they were, two men in suits who could have stepped out of a business magazine. Investors, powerful people who'd already decided that they either wanted to be part of my future or they didn't. I took a deep breath and walked in with the confidence I had built over the past year. "Harper Williams," I said, extending my hand, "founder of Shield Pay. I'm here to show you what's next in fintech." The meeting went better than I expected. They were intrigued. My pitch was strong. The numbers were solid. We were solving real-world problems. And I was prepared to answer every question that came my way. By the end, they told me to expect a follow-up within the week. They were interested. And that word, the weight it carried, felt like the heaviest thing I'd ever heard. But it also felt good.
As I walked out of that building, the city skyline spread out before me. I felt a sense of power one I hadn't felt before. Not from my family, not from my ex, not from anyone, but from myself. For the first time, I could see a future that didn't need to be defined by anyone else's terms.
But even with all this, there was still something nagging at me. The message from Jake, the unanswered text. I couldn't ignore it. That night, I sat at my apartment, pacing back and forth, before finally tapping out a reply. "Jake, if you think you can just walk back into my life and offer a solution to my problems, you're mistaken. I've worked too hard for this. I built this company from the ground up. I'm not interested in whatever you're offering. We're not the same anymore." I stared at the words for a long time before hitting send. And just like that, I felt the weight lift. I wasn't holding on to anything anymore, not him, not the past, just the future, my future. The phone buzzed. It was a new message. It wasn't from Jake. It was from my father.
"Harper, we've been talking. Your mother and I. We want to be involved. We can help you get to the next level. Let's set something up."
I laughed out loud. The audacity. After all this time, after the silence, the dismissals, the exclusion they wanted in, they wanted to attach themselves to my success, because now that I was on the verge of something real, they couldn't stand to be left behind. I've already been working with real partners, real investors who believe in me. Thanks, but no thanks. I pressed send without a second thought. The phone rang immediately. My dad. I ignored it. Then my mother's name popped up. I ignored that too. I knew what they wanted. They wanted control. They wanted to be able to say, "We helped her," but that wasn't the kind of help I needed. I leaned back against the couch. looking out at the city lights, and for the first time in my life, I realized something. I didn't need them to believe in me anymore. I didn't need their approval to succeed. I had done it on my own. But as the night grew darker, something in the pit of my stomach gnawed at me. What if this was a mistake? What if, in pushing them away, I'd alienated myself from the one thing I had been searching for all along? Family, the thing I'd spent years wanting, the thing that I had finally learned to let go of. Just then, my phone buzzed again. It was from Jessica. "Harper, I just heard the news tech bloom. This is what I've been waiting for. You're going to crush it. Just don't forget. We're in this together. No one else." And in that moment, I knew. I didn't need the validation from my family or anyone else, because I already had everything I needed. But just as I started to feel at peace, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked over and opened it. Standing there was Jake, holding a package in his hand. Why is Jake here? What's he really after now? And how much of my past do I have to face before I can finally leave it all behind?